Hey everyone, welcome to part two about how Christ created compassion. Um, in part one, I share more about this account that I'm referencing and this experience where uh, just miraculous things happened and so much joy was experienced, and there's 2,500 people who experience this and talk about how incredible it was, how uplifting it was, how beautiful it was, and all of these marvelous things. There was healing, there was blessings, there was angels ministering, there were prayers and tears and joy and all of these things. To hear more about that, go back and watch part one. Today, I'm going to talk more about the three steps, and these three steps are just a simplified version of how I am articulating what I observed in the account. In the account, we have text about how Christ was about to leave, and then he observed them. He saw the tears in their eyes, and the words say something along the lines of he saw the tears in their eyes as if they were asking him to stay, to tarry a little longer, I think is what the words were. And so from those words, I kind of derived these three steps that allow me to apply and allow you to consider how to apply what process he followed to create compassion. Because after he observed them and imagined as if they were asking him to tarry a little longer, then he says, my bowels are filled with compassion. And so he immediately filled compassion after these things that we observed. And so these are things we observed, again in my words, is he did three things. These are the three steps. Pause is step number one. Step number two, notice. And step number three, imagine. These three steps are ones that we can consider as we live a life impacted by physical limitation, or live a life when we are experiencing chronic pain, or are impacted by a loved one who's dealing with a physical limitation. How can we live abundantly despite all of that? Well, compassion sure adds a whole lot. Compassion, what we learned from this account, is that a whole lot of good followed. A whole lot of good came from compassion. Because Christ followed these three steps, then he felt compassion, and then he changed his plans, and he carried out this ministering and this moment and this experience that was so marvelous. And so maybe compassion can do the same for us. Maybe it can take a circumstance that's challenging and make it, turn it into something, or at least amidst that challenge, we experience some marvelous things. So, let's talk briefly about these three steps. Pause, notice, imagine. This is particularly relevant and top of mind for me in this moment because just, 2 hours ago, I was doing my exercise and I was outside running, and I injured myself. My hamstring is pulled. Something happened. Some injury in my left hamstring. And I was doing a speed run, which is not new. I've been doing this for months. This kind of speed training. And for whatever reason, this morning, when I was doing that, I just felt it immediately, and I was like, oh shoot. And I had to limp to a stop and limp home. Just walk home. And I can feel it now. It's kind of getting stiff. It's probably going to get even more stiff throughout the day. And I've been thinking about these 3 steps. When you're experiencing some challenge, some pain related to an injury or a disease, like what I deal with rheumatoid arthritis, or whatever it might be, that there's this process. There's what we can't necessarily avoid is negative emotion. Negative emotion is going to come up. It's part of the experience. It's going to be there. So when I talk about living abundantly, it's not to eliminate negative emotion. It's actually to embrace that and to accept it. And like what I said just earlier, to find and create miraculous experiences amidst the negative emotion throughout this life, throughout our own experience. And how this looked like for me over the past 2 hours is I was really disappointed. My negative emotion was disappointment. It could have escalated very quickly, and I kind of watched this happen, watched this tendency come, and I stopped it. I stopped myself from going to anger. It could have escalated really easily, and it still feels easy to just go to anger really quickly. Like, gosh, why did that happen? That's so stupid. And have all these thoughts that are just creating anger in me. But instead, the primary emotion, the immediate reaction is, darn it. And I'm just letting myself stay there. And I'm processing the disappointment. And the word disappointment is kind of interesting because it has a concept of appointment. And what you are appointing someone or something to, and then not seeing that happen, right? Dis meaning that we are not seeing that appointment, not seeing that fulfilled, or whatever it is, right? Another way to describe that in this context, an appointment of a thing or a person, I just might simplify that to expectation, right? And so you have an expectation. I had an expectation I was going to do this exercise this morning in the same way I always do, and I'd come away without injury because I've done this many times, many times without injury. And so let me come back to that in just a moment and why that's relevant. First, let me just walk through these 3 steps. Pause. And I'm just going to share a few thoughts about these, and I'm going to include all this in some notes. If you'd like those notes, you can click the link, more content, and I'll email you these notes. But here's a few things, some more specifics around these 3 steps. First, pause. How do you do this? You observe yourself. And this is in relation to, okay, these steps can be applied to yourself or to others. In all kinds of ways we can apply these steps. So some of my comments will be about self, others, so some comments will be about others. I actually think, I'm reviewing my notes. Most of the notes I'm going to go through right now are about how to apply these 3 steps to have compassion for yourself. So, pause. How do we pause? We can observe ourselves. And this is one of the most unique. I've heard a word from someone recently. It's an endowment. This ability to observe ourselves is an endowment, a unique skill that only humans have. Like, it's what separates us from animals. Because we have this consciousness, this cognitive ability to think about our own thinking and to observe ourselves. And so this endowment, this incredible skill that is unique to humans, is one of those powerful things we can tap into to pause. And let's see. Let me just go on to my next notes. Okay, separate yourself from your thoughts. We're dynamic, living beings with a conscious and a spirit that is separate from the thoughts running through our heads. And when we really understand that, it makes it even easier to separate ourselves and to observe ourselves. The other thing around pausing is just breathing. Stop the rush. Our mind is going, and it's going to keep going. And you might get discouraged being like, how do I pause? How do I pause? It comes from breathing, and it comes from observing. The thoughts are going to keep running in your head, but you can get to a place of stillness as you start watching those thoughts. You just bring your attention, you just kind of step outside. I even like to use the imagery of a spirit, of a version of me that's separate from me. And I step right outside of me and I start looking at myself. I'm just like watching the thoughts. And I sometimes imagine the thoughts, I've shared this in some of my videos before, as drive-bys, right? Or someone coming in, walking in maybe there's a room with two doors and someone walks in one door and they walk across the room and they walk out the other door. That's like, I just imagine thoughts are like these things, are like cars driving by or a person walking by, and I just start watching them. I just separate myself and I start watching my thoughts. These are some very practical skills to allow you to pause. Okay, second step, notice. Now that you've been able to separate yourself, to breathe, then you start to bring more consciousness to that observation and notice, where is the suffering? Notice in yourself. And of course, these can all be applied to others. So I'm going to keep talking about yourself primarily in this example. Where is there suffering in me right now? That's a question you can ask. And you're observing, you're in this, like you've kind of stepped outside of yourself and you're observing yourself. And asking where, of those drive-by, those thoughts that are running, which ones are rooted in pain? Which ones are creating some pain? Which ones are creating negative emotion? Or you can bring your attention to different parts of your body where you're experiencing all kinds of sensations. Like for me right now, my hamstring that I just injured this morning, it's really easy for me to notice that. And I'm letting myself notice that. I'm bringing my attention to it. I can bring my attention to it right now in this moment. Like, oh, that part of my body's hurting right now. I'm just noticing it. And in this step of noticing, there's no agenda. There's no problem solving. I'm just noticing. Just bringing my attention to it. Like, oh, what's that hurt like? What is it doing? In this step of noticing, you're allowing the hurt or whatever is happening, you're allowing it to be. You're giving space for it. If you think about this example where Christ paused and he noticed the tears. He didn't go and start handing people Kleenexes. He didn't go problem solving and wipe away their tears. He just noticed. He saw the tears in their eyes. He let the tears be there. In a similar manner, we can do that for ourselves and for others, right? We can apply this toward others. Just notice what's going on. And then third step, imagine. This is the step that is so powerful in getting us to the place of compassion. And it's also the step that I think is a skill that separates compassionate people from uncompassionate people. It's a very distinguishing factor because it ultimately is how we create compassion. But I think pausing and noticing are necessary prerequisites, because you get to gather some facts and understand what's going on. And then, with the third step, with imagine, you start to make some meaning out of those facts. The way this looks, so what Christ did was when he saw the tears, he paused long enough and he got himself into a space where he could notice and just allow what is. Then he imagined. It says, he observed the tears as if they, the people, were asking him to tarry a little longer. That was in his imagination. He was imagining them asking him to tarry with them longer. Notice that they weren't actually asking him, he was just imagining them asking him. And that's what got him to compassion. So in a similar way, we can apply that to ourselves and to others to get to compassion. What's so beautiful and so powerful about that is that we don't actually need to know what another person is thinking. We don't actually have to know what they're experiencing in order for us to get to compassion. Same thing with ourselves. We don't have to know exactly what's going on. Sometimes we get into this analysis. We're really like trying to understand ourselves deeply, and that brings with it an energy of problem solving. We're like trying to solve for ourselves. We're like, what is going on? But we can let go of that. We can let go of the analysis, and we can imagine. We can imagine what might be going on. So, how does this look? For me, this morning, this is what I experienced. Disappointment, right? Wanting to escalate to anger, but I didn't allow myself to go to anger. I just have kept going and staying with disappointment, processing that negative emotion. And that processing includes pausing and noticing, pausing and noticing, pausing and noticing, breathing, allowing the disappointment. And this step of imagination, I view all of this so much, all this work on our mental and emotional health and our place of power, our place of decision, that space between the external factors and what we experience. All of this is such an art. And that's why it's so beautiful and so meaningful, and like I can talk about it forever because there's so much art to it, and it's so unique to each individual. It's going to be unique to you and how you get there and how you're able to create compassion, right? And you might at moments be able to create compassion right away and just start to imagine what's going on for you. Or imagine for others what could be going on for them. What could be behind that hurt? What I experienced this morning was I wasn't ready to imagine. There was some like strong negative emotion. This strong disappointment was just like enough that I just had to stay with it. I just had to allow it. I know myself enough, and I've done this enough that I'm like, I'm not ready to get to compassion. I'm not quite ready for compassion in this moment. But I'm open to it. I stay curious and open and ready for when I start to like feel my energy shift a little bit, and I'm like, oh, and I can access compassion. I can get to this imaginary space and access compassion. But for quite a while, and in many moments, I kept just staying in this disappointment and just allowing it. And then at times, after allowing disappointment, I started to imagine there's some painful experience behind this hurt. If I were to guess at what that experience is, what is it? And when I started to ask myself questions like that, I came back to this concept I introduced earlier about disappointment and expectation. Right? I had an expectation. I'm like, oh. I kept imagining myself, I kept kind of flipping back between myself in the moment before I was injured and then myself now after being injured. And I go to myself before I got injured. I practice compassion for him, compassion for myself in that moment. Because the anger part now, I was wanting to get angry at my past self. I'm like, why did I do that? I should have just slowed down or stopped before I got injured. But then I imagined myself, I took myself back to that place. Like, what was he experiencing? And this is all happened in imagination, right? It's all in the past. Anything that's in the past is now experienced through our imagination. And we might not be able to know exactly what I was thinking at that time. And that's what I'm saying is like, we don't have to know exactly what I was thinking. I just need to, all I'm practicing now is imagination. Like, what could I have been thinking? And I was like, oh, I was thinking, this is something I do all the time. Why would I possibly think that I'm going to injure myself? That gave me some understanding. And then I bring myself back to myself post-injury. And that observation I had of myself was like, I wish this didn't happen. I can hardly walk now. I've got this pain in my left hamstring. This is going to negatively impact my day. It's going to make it hard to walk to the office or do my work or my day-to-day activities and all these things. Those are all the thoughts that I observed, right? And so what did I imagine? I just started to imagine me hurting. I let myself imagine this part of me that thought I was going to live this day without pain. I'm like, oh, that opened me up to compassion. I feel it now as I'm imagining it, right? I'm imagining this hurt self, this self that thought this day was going to go differently. And I have compassion on him. I'm like, I'm sorry. You were wrong. And that's why you're disappointed. I'm so sorry. Today's not going to be exactly how you thought it was going to be. I'm sorry. And that just softens it. It keeps me from going to anger. And it allows me to access compassion. And that energy, that vibration of compassion is healing. It's like it has this healing effect in my body. And this acceptance of what is. Some other things to consider in this third step around imagining. You can ask yourself, this pain, this hurt that I'm in or that another person might be in, if I access and imagine this pain that I'm in right now, what might that pain want from me in this moment? And you can just start to imagine. Give the pain or give the emotional experience, the disappointment, a personality, a characteristic, a persona of some sort. Imagine it as a child or as another person. Be like, what do you want from me right now? And just listen and imagine what's going on for that. What's going on behind that pain? And again, in this example I shared with you, for me today, this morning, was, oh, I thought today was going to be different. And I was wrong about that. And what this pain was asking for me is to comfort. Like, accept this injury. And offer myself comfort. And from a place of compassion, I'm able to offer myself comfort. Another question to consider, what might the hurt want you to say to it? Or what might the hurt want you to do right now? as we practice compassion, as we practice these 3 steps, you can see how we can reduce pain. There's already pain. I mean, I experience and have experienced for many years chronic pain due to rheumatoid arthritis. And from this injury I just experienced this morning, I have this pain in my hamstring. But compassion can allow me, it can prevent me from adding additional pain, right? When I get into anger, I'm adding pain. When I practice these 3 steps, I reduce the pain of anger. I reduce the pain of shame. I reduce the pain of discouragement. From a place of compassion, I heal myself emotionally. And that emotional healing can also impact me physically. Okay. Those are some thoughts for you today. A continuation of this topic of compassion. An exploration of these 3 steps that we observed in this account of how Christ created compassion. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love to hear any of your thoughts or questions or experiences. I love you all so much. I'll speak to you next time.